Okay. Okay. Second part of the lecture for the first week. This is chapter 3. Let's see if I can figure out where I am. There we go. Okay. This is going to be a short one, so it's not going to last all that long. We're talking about elements of research in chapter 3. All research begins with a problem, and of course, that's what I'm going to be asking you to do, is to find a problem and something that you would like to do on the reservation. Potentially, it's something you want to do on the reservation when you take. What I need to do in this class is make sure you have all the information you need to be able to take Dr. Ami's research class 413. That's what I need to do. I need to make sure you have all that information. So one of the things I need you to do is to develop a research plan. And all research begins with a problem. So your first discussion question has to do with coming up with this problem and identifying how you're going to do it, or what the research potential is going to look like. You're going to use your research design later on in the semester or later on in the class. But this is what I want you to do. Now, normally, if this were a 15-week class, I would have other discussion questions, and this would be your final project, would be writing a research proposal. But of course, we only have 5 weeks, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the process of putting together a research proposal. So the first thing you need to do is to find a problem on the reservation, um, a problem that you see, and I'm not going to talk about any of the problems. It could have to do with depression, could have to do with crystal meth, could have to do with alcohol, could have to do with domestic violence. It could have to do with resilience. We are identifying uh, ideas. The reason I came up with resilience when I was doing my own research was because people said, well, you need to do, there's 80% of the population of this reservation were alcoholics at one point or another. And I was thinking, geez, that's not right. These are all my friends. I wouldn't want to be identified as a person that is an alcoholic. I don't drink, but because I am, a Bradway, I'm an alcoholic. All Bradways are alcoholics. And there is that idea out there. And I was talking to somebody the other day. I can't remember who it was. Anyway, oh, I was talking. I was turning turning in my truck, my U-Haul. I hauled all my household goods from Saley to Iowa, and I was turning in my truck, and I was talking. I said, well, I just moved from the Navajo reservation to Iowa, and they said, oh, do you like it here in Iowa? I said, yeah. I've been here for 10 years. And we started talking about American Indians, and of course, everybody has a story about something about one of the tribes, or they had their best friend was a Cherokee or whatever. Anyway, he said, well, a lot of them have a problem with alcohol, and maybe in his experience, on the Ho-Chunk reservation, or maybe he had experience with Standing Rock or whatever, or Fort Peck or Fort Belknap for that matter. I don't know. He was in Iowa, or maybe the Meskwaki. They're right there in the middle of Iowa. They don't. They have reservation. They have tribal lands, but they don't have. It's not a reservation. And it may, who knows? Who knows what his experience is? But he said, "Well, I understand. Most American Indians have a drinking problem, and that I don't like that idea. I don't like identifying people by their negative traits. If people were talking about white people, it would be kind of insulting and kind of embarrassing if they said, well, white people have a greed problem. Well, yeah, All the billionaires seem to be greedy, but I'm not. I give money away. I don't gamble because I don't want to give money. I would rather give money to a guy knocking on the door saying, I need $20 to buy diapers. Rather give my money to him than to go to the casino and maybe uh, spend $20 and make $100. I'd rather do that because my $20 are going to go to the owner of the casino. And if the owner of the casino is Donald Trump or some other billionaire, I don't think that's a good idea. I just don't like that idea. Anyway, I would rather identify my friends as, it's. I don't like the idea. I mean, if you say all white people are greedy, if you watch Cops, all black people are criminals. Hispanics, especially if they shave their head bald, are bad people that use the F word all the time. That's just not. I don't agree with that. I think that's incorrect. I think that's inaccurate. And of course, I had all my colleagues and all my friends were native up in Montana, and I didn't like the idea that I didn't want to identify them as people that commit domestic violence at a high rate, or that have alcoholism at a high rate, or are more susceptible to crystal meth. I didn't want to identify them as a negative. I wanted to identify them as a positive, and that's why I did the research that I did. So that was the problem that I found. Now you guys, you're always trying to solve a problem. I like the idea of you solving the problem than me coming onto the reservation and telling you what you should do to help yourselves. I don't like that idea. I think it's not my job to do that. My job is to help you be the best person that you possibly could be. So when I was up there, I realized that I needed to say something positive about my friends, and that's why I did the research on resilience rather than something negative. I didn't like that idea. It just didn't make any sense to me. But that's me. Somebody else, somebody else may have other ideas. They want to help. That's the idea. I don't. That's too missionary for me. And I'm certainly not a religious person, and I'm certainly not a missionary. I don't have that idea that I have the answer to whatever your problem is. I don't. I don't have the answer to anything. I can just help you get to a place where you can help yourself and you can help other people. That's what being a psychologist is all about. Not being a missionary, not solving people's problems. I'm not going to solve your problems. That's not my idea. So if you come to me and you think that I'm going to tell you what to do, then you're probably mistaken. I will help you get to wherever you want to go. Wow, that took a long time, didn't it? A research problem is a question or issue that requires a response in the form of a structured scientific inquiry. But all problems are research problems because not all problems are research problems because not every problem can be studied according to the rules of scientific inquiry. And that's what I needed to do. So I had this idea. I want to show something positive about this population. So what do I study? And I came up with resilience. Well, what causes resilience? What makes somebody resilient? And of course, they had studies. There have been tons of studies looking at hardiness or looking at resilience. And one of the things they said was that women are more resilient than men. So that was one of the things I looked at. Being an educator, I'm hoping that I'm helping people become resilient. So one of my ideas, one of my independent variables, was that the more education you have, the more resilient you're going to be. Another axiom of resilience studies is that the more trauma that you've had, the less likely you are to be resilient. Dealing with and actually this came out of the fact that I had friends that wanted me to help with powwows, and so I got into the powwow movement. It's huge up in the north. Uh, all the reservations have their own powwows, and people go to powwows, and they have drum groups, and the drum groups they'll go and they will participate in all the powwows, and it's great. I helped sponsor one of the drum groups up there. It's a group called Dry Lake. They have CDs out, and it's northern. It's it's northern drumming, so it's a little bit faster than southern drumming. Anyway, so because I had done that, and I saw that the people that were dancing and the people that were drumming and the people that were participating, they were less likely to have problems with alcohol or drugs. And so I thought, well, that would be a good thing to show that the more you adhere to your own culture, the more likely that this individual would be resilient. And that was one of the other things that I measured. As we have seen, and of course, I had to come up with all of the ways to do this. So I had to look at all the research and find a good instrument to use. Wagnalls and Young was the resilience instrument that I used. Um, Wagnall was a psychologist and Young was a nurse. But it was, and they published their resilience measurement in a nursing journal. So, I'm a psychologist. I'm not allowed to look at, no, that's not true. Uh, and of course, I worked in medicine, I find nurses just as bright as a psychologist, or just as bright as an AMA journal, or it's a nursing journal. And then I looked at social work journals, and I found, well, geez, they do just as good a research as psychologists do. But a lot of psychologists wouldn't agree with me, and I think they're stupid. I'm sorry. You can quote me. As we have seen in the first chapter, the basic assumptions of science cannot be confirmed or disconfirmed empirically. It's really hard to prove that something exists. Gravity is something that we can prove. If we drop something, it goes down, and as long as we're on Earth, that's mostly true. Does it always go the same speed? No. If we're in thinner air, then it will go faster. No, it goes slower. If we're in thicker air, if you're up in Saley and you drop something, the air is thinner in Saley than it is in Los Angeles. So if you drop something in Saley, it'll actually hit the ground faster because the air is thinner. If there's more atmosphere, you're in Los Angeles or you're in Florida. It's humid as hell here, and it's a swamp. There are areas of Florida that are at zero elevation. They're below sea level. As stupid as that sounds, why in the world would somebody live in a swamp? Well, there's lots of people here. It is the fourth most populous state in the union, despite the fact it's not all that large. It's not as large as Arizona, but it's really big. I mean, it's got a lot of people. Many questions are not grounded in identifiable and observable phenomena. And when people first came up with the concept of resilience, it was difficult to define, and we didn't have any ways of observing the phenomenon. But somebody had to come up with now that we have this idea, now we can come up with a measurement for that concept, and we can positively identify it. So how in the world do you identify somebody that has a stronger cultural background than somebody that isn't? Well, I found a measurement that was developed by an individual at UCLA. And I can't think of their name right off the top of my head. It was another lady that did it. But it's been used all around the world for, in different places, and with the native population in the United States. Will Western civilization disappear? This is not grounded in empirical evidence. There's no empirical evidence that shows that the Western civilization will disappear. It's here now. Will it always be here? Well, Roman culture disappeared, Greek culture disappeared, Egyptian culture disappeared. Is it possible the Western culture will be absorbed and we'll just have one world culture? Eastern culture, China and Japan, Will that meld with Western culture? And suddenly we don't have a Western culture anymore. That's a possibility. Is the color blue nicer than the color green? Well, it all depends on it's an interesting question. I have a sister that is no longer with us, but we used to, and we almost came into fisticuffs because of this. She was my older sister, and she hated me because I'm a male, and males are loud and boisterous and opinionated and whatnot. Anyway, I can remember arguing with her over and over again about turquoise. Is turquoise blue or is turquoise green? Well, I see turquoise, most turquoise, as blue. And she sees most turquoise. She always, whether it's a blue turquoise or a green turquoise, it really doesn't make any difference. As far as she was concerned, it was green. So we were in Great Falls, Montana, and they had painted their water tower. They painted it turquoise. So, so I'm driving around, and we were supposed to. There was a motel. We're headed for a motel, and we were headed. The motel was right near the water tower, so we were supposed to go toward the water tower. And so I said, Do you see the water tower?" And she said, "Well, I see three of them." I said, "Well, we need to go near the blue near the blue water tower." And she said, none of them are blue. There's a green one, there's a yellow one, and there's a red one. And I said, "But they said it was the blue water tower." And she said, none of them are blue. And of course, I'm driving down the street, and I can't look. And here's my sister sitting right beside me. She's supposed to be navigating. She's supposed to tell me which direction to go. And she said, none of them are blue. I don't know what you're going to do. Maybe it's on the other side of town. One of those kind of deals. Anyway, so finally I got to a point where I could look. And there it was. It was a turquoise. It was painted turquoise. And of course, the person that told me about it said it was blue. And I considered it blue. But my sister, of course, because she identifies turquoise as green, didn't see it as blue at all. She saw it as green, as weird as that is. Anyway, and I know I've seen green turquoise and blue turquoise. Anyway, and I'm actually wearing a ring right now that's blue turquoise. So there you go, my sister. She's no longer with us, but I wish she were here so I could tell her, look at this turquoise, it's blue. And listen to her tell me how green it was, as weird as that is. The unit of analysis refers to what will be studied and must be defined at the outset of the research project before data are collected and or analyzed. And of course, this is one of the things I want you to do this in your first discussion question, is to identify the unit of analysis that you're going to be using. What is the researcher going to study? For example, depression, attempted and completed suicides, the number of prescriptions of Xanax. These are all units of analyses. So if we're talking about depression and the fact that somebody attempted suicide, were they on Xanax? Were they on the anti-anxiety medication Xanax? Well, how do we measure Xanax? Well, we can measure Xanax by how many milligrams they take. That is our unit of analysis, is the Xanax. The unit of observation refers to the unit that is afforded by a particular data set. It measures the phenomena empirically, measuring political activity by voting turnouts. That gives us a numerical figure. The number of pills of Xanax or the number of milligrams of Xanax would be a unit of observation. This is what we're going to measure. We're studying depression, and we're going to measure, or anxiety, and we're going to measure it by our unit of analyses is depression, and our unit of observation is how many Xanax are these people taking. That would be that. Richard M. Medina wrote a paper analyzing 381 suspected terrorists and persons suspected of supporting terrorist organizations, as well as their ties, for example, their acquaintances and friends. Now, this is really important because when the federal government looks at something, we look at something and we seem not to see everything that's there. So when we first started dealing with terrorism, and we've been dealing with terrorism for decades. We dealt with communist terrorists during the Cold War. After the Cold War was over with and communism pretty much collapsed, if we were looking at terrorism, we were looking at Muslim terrorists. Of course, those of you who have been, maybe you were in the military during after 9/11, you were looking at Islamic terrorists. When I was in the military, I was actually in a terrorist attack in Germany. A communist group called the Baader Meinhof Gang, you can look it up, came on to our base. I was stationed at Ramstein, and they blew up USAFE headquarters. USAFE stands for United States Air Force Europe. USAFE. Okay. Anyway, they blew up USAFE headquarters. You can look it up on the internet. Really kind of cool. I'm not going to show it to you. Yes, I was there. I was the first medic on the scene, actually. Strangely enough, nobody was there. They blew up USAFE headquarters, but we were having an exercise that day. Now, this is really kind of weird. If you're military, you understand what I'm talking about. So if you were enlisted and you were a working puke, then you had to go to work at 5 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock in the morning. I was working in the clinic. So I had to get there a little bit early. It was like 7 o'clock in the morning. The bomb went off just as I'm coming on to base. And of course, USAFE headquarters, there's always lots of people there. Well, unfortunately for the terrorists, the bomb went off at 7 o'clock in the morning. And there's never anybody at USAFE headquarters at 7 o'clock in the morning. There were two people in the building at the time. And one of the guys was just going in. The bomb blew up and it blew him back, and he broke his leg, and he had he was bleeding. It looked like he had his artery was bruised. At least it was bruised. It was turning blue really fast, and so we were afraid that there was his artery was injured. Eventually, he lost his leg. But when I got there, I put a tourniquet on his leg above the where it was bleeding, and then we transported him, of course. But strangely enough, because I was coming onto base, and USAFE headquarters is right around the corner from the main gate. I was driving down and damn it, I went down the wrong road. If I'd gone down the other road, I would have missed it. But since I was going around toward past USAFE headquarters to go to work, I saw it. And of course, I stopped. And there were people streaming out of the dental clinic because the dental clinic was right across the street. Anyway, and what had happened, the windows had blown in and people had been cut by the glass. Well, I kind of went past there and went into USAFE headquarters. I could see the guy in the doorway. So here I am, it was like a minute after the bomb had gone off. And so here I am in the headquarters, and there he is. And there was a guy down the hall who was injured. He lost his eye, and he had a head wound. But so I'm taking care of the guy here, and some of the dental clinic personnel came over, the ones that weren't hurt, the ones that were in the back of the building. They came over and they started. Of course, we're all in fatigues, and we've all got on our chemical gear because that's as an exercise. So we're all in lots of clothes. And here we're taking care of these guys, and they picked up the other guy and they took him back to he had a head injury, and he at this point he hadn't lost his eye, he just damaged his eye, but he had this head wound. And they staunched the bleeding, and they carried him out, and it took him about a minute, and I'm still with this guy, and it looks like his leg's getting bigger, and we've torn his pants leg off, or I've torn his pants leg off, and I kind of put a tourniquet on. It was my damn belt that I never got back. Anyway, so I put the tourniquet on his leg, and about that time the cops show up, the SPs showed up, and of course they thought that I was the terrorist. So and of course he was hurt, and they called, and about that time the other medics showed up from the emergency room, and so they transported him. But they took me off, and they started questioning me because what the hell was I doing there? The building hadn't been cleared yet. How dare you go into a building that hadn't been cleared? And it turned out that the bomb was on an RV. It was on an RV. It was in a gas canister, a propane gas canister. They look like a bomb. Anyway, there were two of them, and both of them were supposed to go off, but one of them went off before the other one did, and it shot the other one into the building, and it shot it down the. That's what hit the guy in the head. This propane bomb had hit him in the head, and that's how he lost his eye. But they found it and they brought it out, and of course they hadn't cleared the building. So if not, there had been no other bomb there, I probably wouldn't. Nothing would have happened. But I got in trouble for not waiting for the police to show up. The guy lost his leg anyway, and the guy lost his eye anyway. I guess I didn't do anything. But I got in trouble for not waiting for the SPs to show up. And the problem was that they were had these smoke pots, and they were blowing these things, and so everybody thought they thought that nothing had happened. But of course, this huge explosion had taken place. But it sounded like what the bombs that they were setting off. So there were two sad things of the day. One, of course, I was the first medic on the scene, so I got in trouble, but then my commander refused to reprimand me. But the SPs wanted me to lose a stripe and all the rest of it. You know. But the other sad thing was that they closed the gate. So if I had come on base 2 minutes later, I would have gotten to go home and gotten to take the rest of the day off. As it was, I was there for, I don't know, 12, 14 hours. It was an exercise. Anyway, those of you who have been in the military know what I'm talking about. Medina's unit of analysis was terrorist networks because Medina's contention was that terrorists and their supporters are not isolated actors. Now, this is Medina did his research in the right after 9/11. Right after 9/11, and of course, he was looking at what he thought we should be looking at, what he thought the CIA and the FBI and the NSA and the DIA, intelligence agency, yeah, DIA, what he thought they should be looking at. And of course, at this point, they didn't see that. They saw them as sanctioned by governments, as cohesive units. But the reality was some of these were fairly loose groups, but we needed to look at the entire organization. This is a collectivist country. These are individuals that don't do anything by themselves. Medina saw terrorists and their supporters operating within larger networks or structures that are organized in highly patterned ways. And this was true, but what we wanted to see, we wanted to blame a select government. And a lot of times these are paramilitary groups. These are organizations like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And of course, those don't have anything to do with any government. I mean, otherwise, most of the terrorists that were part of the 9/11 attack were from Saudi Arabia. Otherwise, we would have attacked Saudi Arabia. We didn't, of course. We went into, it was Al-Qaeda that did it. Excuse me, it was Al-Qaeda that did it. And Al-Qaeda was being supported in Afghanistan. So we invaded Afghanistan instead. Unfortunately, we haven't really solved that conundrum yet. We're still in Afghanistan, but I don't know where we're going to go from here. Thus, what Medina studied was not the same as the unit afforded by the data that he analyzed. Individuals and ties between individuals as the units of observation. So that's what Medina found, and you can look at his research. Once the researcher has decided on the unit of analysis appropriate to the problem being explored and the hypotheses to be tested, the research design, data collection methods, and data analysis decisions have to be chosen accordingly. Abraham Kaplan, and you can see his lovely beard to your right, called the process of selecting the units of analysis the locus problem. The locus problem is selecting the ultimate subject matter for inquiry. And of course, that's what happened with Medina. Medina started out thinking that he was going to be analyzing terrorist networks, and eventually, of course, he was looking at individuals and ties between the individuals, not with large structures, but with individuals. And of course, that's how we trace terrorists today. We not only are looking for, and that's how we caught Osama bin Laden. We weren't just looking for him; we were looking for the people that communicated with him. If we were looking, we destroyed his network, and he was still a functional individual. But what we needed to do in order to shut him down was to follow the people that were in communication with him, his ties, the individuals, his relatives. That's what we needed to do, and that's what we did, and that's how we caught Osama bin Laden, who was the individual that orchestrated the 9/11 attacks. Ecological fallacy, distortions that arise from generalizing about individuals from the group. The NRA is a conservative organization, so each of its members must vote Republican. And of course, that's not true. There are Democrats who are members of the NRA who vote Democratic, of course. Individualistic fallacy, distortions that arise from generalizing about a group from the individual. George has been caught sending letter bombs to liberal politicians, and he is a member of the VFW. The VFW must be a conservative terrorist organization, which of course isn't true. This is one of the problems we're having, or one of the interesting aspects of the Boogaloo Boys. If you've heard of the Boogaloo Boys, these are individuals that like guns. So they go to these protests, and they're heavily armed. Well, the question is, what do they think? Well, the answer is the only similarity between this group is just men who like to dress up with weaponry. And they have armor on, and of course and sometimes they wear Hawaiian shirts. So if you see any of these protests and you see somebody walking around with a flak jacket on and with a AK-47 or an AR-15 with lots of ammunition in his vest, then you're probably looking at a Boogaloo Boy. But but you don't know what they think, because some of them are highly conservative, some of them are relatively liberal, and of course they haven't really discharged their weapons, I don't think, unless some of the killings that happened last night have something to do with that. I don't think so. I'm not sure. Anyway, the Boogaloo Boys keep showing up at these things, and it's kind of scary. Somebody who's armed to the teeth with 150 rounds of ammunition. This isn't a good sight. And of course, if that makes the police, the law enforcement open fire because they see this man carrying around this rifle, a lot of people could be hurt. Anyway, why am I talking about this? Oh, we're talking about conservative terrorist group, VFW. My wife is a member of the VFW, and of course, they are not. They may be a little bit conservative, but they're certainly not a terrorist group, just because one of their members is a terrorist group, and that's known as individualistic fallacy. So if you look at a group and then generalize about what they think, that's an ecological fallacy. If you look at an individual and then look at the groups that they belong to as agreeing with him, then of course that's an individualistic fallacy. Variables in research are measured concepts. Research about Alzheimer's disease might look at age and gender as a variable, and they have looked at age and gender as a variable as far as Alzheimer's disease is concerned. So what have they discovered? Well, they've discovered that the older you are, the more likely that you have Alzheimer's disease. If you turn 80, or it's 80 or 85. If you turn 80 or 85 and don't have Alzheimer's disease, you probably won't develop Alzheimer's disease. So what we are looking at is at what age do you develop Alzheimer's disease? I am a year and a half younger than my sister. My sister has Alzheimer's. She's having memory problems. I don't have any memory problems that I'm aware of anyway. I don't have any memory problems, but she is older than I am. Now, why in the world did she develop Alzheimer's disease and I didn't? Well, I've been working in education. I've been accumulating information all my life, and her life has been knitting things and crocheting things and watching, Golden Girls on television. She doesn't, and she, and if you ask her, she never has an opinion about anything. She never wants to talk about anything. She doesn't like arguments. So, she doesn't like to think. So now she doesn't have to think because she can't remember anything, as weird as that sounds. Types of variables. A dependent variable is the variable the researcher wants to explain. In my own research, I was looking, my dependent variable was resilience. So I was looking at how these other variables impact resilience. They were my independent variables, the variable that explains or induces the changes in the dependent variables. So I was looking at gender, I was looking at age, I was looking at trauma, I was looking at level of education, I was looking at level of culture. And I was trying to see how that affected resilience. So resilience was my dependent variable. All five of those others were independent variables. In my research, I didn't have a control variable, but a control variable is used to determine whether an observed association between independent and dependent variables is real. I didn't have a control variable. Not exactly sure how I would have done it. That research doesn't lend itself to a control. Continuous variables do not have a minimum size unit or definition, no precise division, such as length of time. Discrete variables have a minimum sized unit. One unit can be clearly differentiated from another. Money in a bank account, it's not unlimited. Wouldn't that be nice if it was a continuous variable? If money was a continuous variable. Children in a family, of course, it's a discrete variable. It is limited. I think the most children born to one woman was like 40 or something, or 28. The largest, yeah, okay. So, women only have viability from their first menstruation until they go through menopause. Well, how many children can you have in that time frame? And of course, the largest family was limited. I mean, you can't have 150 children. A woman cannot give birth to 150 children. It just doesn't happen. There's not enough time. Who wants to be pregnant all the time? Two variables are related when changes in the values of one systematically brings about the changes in values of the other. Covariation is when a connection exists between two or more variables. And as I said, there was no connection between age, gender, and what was the other? Level of education. Had nothing at all to do with resilience. Did not affect resilience at all. However, trauma, which normally affects resilience, had no effect as well. But the only thing that, as it increased, the resilience increased was level of enculturation. So there was a covariation between enculturation and resilience. For example, the link between income levels and total years of schooling. More years of schooling leads to higher income. That may potentially not be true. I figured this out this morning. I have 24 years of education, I think. 12 years of high school, 12 years of elementary school and high school, 12. Then I have an associate degree, that's 2 more, that's 14. I have 2 master's degrees, that's 18. Plus I had 2 years of graduate work in political science that I never finished, so that's 20. and then I have my PhD, which is a 4-year degree that took me 11 years. So you can take that one in the bank. Anyway, so let's say I have 24 years of education. The faster a pilot flies, the higher the G-force. I hope you've never been in a jet airplane. It's kind of it's not the most pleasant feeling in the world. But the faster they go, of course, then you've got all this, the gravity force is pushing against you. So if he goes really, really fast, then he may pull 4 Gs. In other words, it's gravity times 4. So it would be like being on Mars or whatever. So the G-force is fairly high. And I don't know, I can tell you what it feels like. It feels like you can't breathe. It feels like you've got a heavy weight pushing against you. And what you have to do in order to fight it is you have to force the blood into your extremities. Because of the G-force, you can't, your heart is beating, but it can't, because of the force against you, you can't force the blood down into your legs or down into your arms. And the problem, of course, is that the more G's you pull, the more likely you're going to pass out because the blood can't get to your brain. Pilots, of course, they're used to this because they fight this all the time, and they're trained to fight it. And the way they fight it is by I don't know how to explain it to you. You force blood into you kind of tighten up and you force blood into your extremities. So you know when the G-force is coming because you know when you're going to accelerate, and so they tighten their muscles up. They tighten their muscles up and force the blood into their extremities, which includes your head, and of course it also includes your legs and your hands. This is one of the reasons why they have, if they're not very good at it, one of the problems that they have is that their hands will go numb. So if you have somebody who, even when they're on the ground, they have problems with some pilots will have this because they're not very good at forcing the blood, or they don't pull G's very often. And when they do pull G's, they almost pass out, that kind of stuff. Anyway, their hands will go numb. It's a price you pay for being a pilot. Well, at least a fighter pilot. If you're flying a transport plane, you're not pulling, you may be pulling half a G or whatever. Relation between education and income, we talked about this before. How many years of education you had. Of course, theoretically, you make more money. I have more education than my wife, and her retirement is higher than the money I'm making right now. As a matter of fact, I've never made more money than her retirement pay, which is kind of irritating. Direction, relations between variables are either positive or negative. So if income or G-force, the faster you go, the more G's that you pull. If it was the other way around, the faster you went, the less G's that you pulled, that would be a negative. That would be a negative direction. But of course, it's a positive direction because it's G-force. Positive relation, when the independent variable increases, the dependent variable also increases. That's what happened with resilience and enculturation. The more enculturated you were, the higher your resilience level. Now, it was supposed to be a negative or inverse relation, resilience and trauma. The more trauma you've been through, the less resilience you had. It was supposed to be negative, but there was no direction as far as that was concerned with American Indians. But if we look at other individuals, we go to Africa, we go to Russia, we go to Indonesia, and we put these people through more trauma, or they've been through more trauma, then the lower their resilience is. It's a negative direction as far as resilience and trauma is concerned. But from my research and from other people's research, actually it wasn't the Navajo reservation, it was the Zuni reservation. Or maybe it's the Zuni and the Navajo, I don't know, I don't remember. The other two pieces of research that showed exactly the same thing that my research showed, that increased trauma does not cause decreased resilience. Positive correlation, the variables go in the same direction. Studying and grades hopefully have a positive correlation, we hope. So the smarter you are, the harder you're working in school, the higher your grades are, hopefully. Negative correlation, the variables go in opposite direction. Heroin use and grades probably have a negative correlation. So the more heroin you shoot up, the less likely you are to do well in school. Positive correlation, two variables increase together or they decrease together. The example, the number of gallons of gas pumped is positively correlated to the amount spent on gas. And of course, I just traveled from Saline to Iowa and then Iowa to Florida, and I pumped a lot of gas between one place and the other. And I can tell you that the more gas I pumped into my tank, the more money I had to pay. Of course, half the time I was driving a moving van, and I was putting $50, $60 worth of gas in there, but I was pumping 25, 30 gallons every time I stopped. So gas between Iowa and Saline was probably about $2 a gallon, which was better than $4 a gallon. It would have cost me over $100 every time I filled up with gasoline. Negative correlation, variables move in opposite directions. Miles traveled is negatively correlated to the amount of gas left in your tank. And I can tell you, my son is kind of like me. He hates to stop for gas. So we run the tank dry. And sometimes when you run the tank dry, there's no place to fill up. And we came really close a couple of times. One time we were going over Raton Pass in between Colorado and New Mexico. And we were coming over the pass, and we were hoping we went downhill all the way because we were running out of gas and we were running on empty. That time he had about a half a tank left when we stopped, and I don't remember where we stopped, but it was the first gas station, I can tell you that. And it was kind of interesting. Or not, I don't know, really kind of strange. Why we are so dumb. The older a man gets, the less hair that he has, and I can tell you that, well, if you can see me right now, I'm showing you my bald spot. I have one on top of my head, and my widow's peak. You've got a top knot in the middle. You guys don't have the same kind of hair that I have, but some white people are kind of bald in front. My brother's completely bald in front. He's got the bald spot on top of his head. All my brothers, all four of us, all three of, well, there's four of us, but all of us have the bald spot on top of their heads, which is just thinning hair. And of course, I don't see it, so I don't know it's there. I get kind of shocked when I take a mirror and I look at the back of my head because it's pretty thin. I imagine that's what Donald Trump is doing when he's doing that horrible comb over of his. But I've also got widow's peaks, and I can show you what that looks like. Well, I can show you. Wait a minute. Here you go. It means that you don't have any hair here, and you don't have any hair here. That's a widow's peak. You have hair in the middle, but you don't have, these areas are going bald. Anyway, and your ears grow. As you get older, your ears grow bigger. That's why your grandfathers and your great-grandfathers look like they have ears, elephant ears. But the reality is your nose and your ears continue to grow as you get older. Looking forward to having a big schnoz. Positive correlation implies direct relationship between two variables. Meditation increases the level of concentration. I don't know. I don't meditate. But people who meditate say that that's true. I seem to come up with just as good ideas as they do, so I'm not exactly sure that's really true. But lucky you, Dr. Russ will talk about these things. She does meditate. Dr. Don Robinson he meditates as well. So I'm sure, I don't know if he's talked about it or not, but he meditates, and of course he claims that his level of concentration is superior to anybody else's. I don't know what Dr. Russ says. We really didn't get into that conversation when we were hiring her this summer. The magnitude of a relation is the extent to which variables covary positively or negative. The magnitude of a relation. The highest magnitude of relation is a perfect relation in which knowledge of the value of one or more independent variables determines exactly the value of the dependent variable. This never happens. It is theoretical. There is never a perfect relation between two variables. So, well, maybe the gasoline thing. But, if you're dealing with a car that gets good mileage and a car that gets bad mileage, like my son's car, he said he always knew when I was needing gas because he still had at least a quarter of a tank, sometimes a little bit more. So his car burned a lot less gas than my truck did. At the other extreme is the lowest magnitude of relation, the zero relation, where no systematic covariation between the values of an independent variable and a dependent variable can be discerned. If a relation has no magnitude, it also has no direction. And we do this with scatter plots. I was just talking to an individual, we're talking about statistics, and she said she hates scatter plots. Well, the reality is that a scatter plot tells you a lot, gives you a lot of information. Gives you a lot of information. A positive relationship looks like this. That is a positive relationship. Goes from here to here. A negative relationship goes from here to here. Now, as you can see, there's hardly anything in the positive quadrants, but there's a lot of stuff in the negative quadrants. So if it goes from 4 to 2 or 2 to 4, however you like to look at this, then it's a negative relationship. If it goes from 3 to 1 or 1 to 3, as you are looking at it, then that's a positive relationship. This is what no relationship looks like. A lot of people do research, think that they're going to find something, and then they do a scatter plot, and this is what their scatter plot looks like. This means there's no relationship between their dependent variable and their independent variable. So when I did my research and I was looking at age, this is what it looked like. There was no relationship between resilience and age. When I looked at gender, I assumed that women were more resilient than men. They tend to be in the general population, but not in the native population. This is what I found. When I was looking at level of education, and this broke my heart, because I'm thinking I'm making you resilient by giving you all this information. But the reality is you didn't have to go to school to be resilient. It looked like this. And when we did trauma was supposed to look like this. The higher the level of trauma, the lower the resilience. It was supposed to be a negative correlation. But it wasn't. It looked like this. And the native population, I'm white, so I don't have, mine would look like this, theoretically. The higher the trauma, the lower the resilience. But the native population looks like this. And it's one of the only populations that we have measured that have no relationship between, let me see if I can make this thing come back. Oops, I'm sorry. It's one of the only populations that has no relationship. However, when we looked at level of enculturation and resilience, it looked like this. So scatter plots are very important. I've been teaching psychology for a long time, since 1991 at the college level, and it took me forever to figure this out. It really did. I did my own dissertation, and I hated scatter plots. I didn't want to do it. It was when I was helping my students at Ashford do their research that I discovered how important this was. And I'm not the brightest person in the world. Potentially, I should have figured this out a long time ago. Research hypothesis is a tentative answer to a research problem expressed in a stated relationship between independent and dependent variables. The null hypothesis. This is something that I want you to write. This is something that I want you to write in the second discussion. The null hypothesis. So let's say your hypothesis is, what my hypothesis was, that the stronger the enculturation, the stronger the resilience. That was my hypothesis. The null hypothesis states that there is no relationship between enculturation and resilience. So because scientists are supposed to be scientists, and we are never supposed to think only in one direction. We're supposed to come up with a hypothesis and then prove that we're wrong. That's what the scientific method is. We have to state things in a null hypothesis. So when we do a research proposal, We not only have to say resilience is caused by stronger enculturation, but we also have to state the null hypothesis. There is no relationship. The null hypothesis of my research was that, the level of enculturation did not affect resilience. That's the null hypothesis. And the reason you state that is because as a scientist, you need to try to prove the null hypothesis. You need to try to prove that you are wrong. That is the idea. That keeps you honest, theoretically. Anyway, a lot of people, their egos are too strong, and they have a hard time saying that I did something incorrectly, or that something I thought was incorrect. 4 characteristics among all hypotheses. They have to be clear, they have to be specific, they have to be testable with available methods, and they should be value free. In other words, there are no value judgments here. A value judgment would be, oh geez, I can't even think of one off the top of my head. Value judgment would be all American Indians are drunks. That would be a value judgment. What? Where did I come up with that? Well, there are people, like I said, I just talked to a guy that was, he was working with U-Haul, who said, well, American Indians have a problem with drinking, don't they? Like all American Indians have a problem with drinking. Yeah, all white people are assholes, Anyway, that's a value judgment. And if you say that all white people are assholes, then that is a value judgment as well. Maybe you don't like them, but maybe not all white people are assholes. Maybe 90% are, but not all of them. Anyway, that would be a value judgment. Or all white people are white supremacists or something. That's a value judgment. You can't prove that that's true or not true, actually. And that is the end of our lecture. Now that I've called white people assholes, I guess it's time to stop. That's the end of the lecture for the first chat. I'm really excited to be back teaching again. I know I've only had 4 or 5 weeks off, but for some reason I missed you guys. So I love my students. I know there's something wrong with me. Anyway. Okay, that's it. That's the end of the first week. We covered 3 chapters. You need to write a discussion question. In the discussion question, you need to talk about the problem that you want to deal with. So think about this. Don't just go, depression is really strong on the reservation. Well, of course, you could use that if you want, but I want you to think about this and think about what you would like to see, the research that you would like to see. If I think there are 15 people in class. If I get 15 people in class that are all doing research on depression on the reservation, that ought to be interesting. Anyway, I want you to do that. I want you to look at your units of observation and units of analyses. I want you to come up with that this week. And of course, that'll be 40 points. And there's also a exam. There's an exam over the material I just gave you. Now, I'm going to give you all a hint. So if you listen to this lecture, you're going to find out how to take your exam and do really well on it. I just want you to learn this material. I don't want to flunk anybody at this point in your careers. But I need to give you this material, and you need to learn it. And the reason you need to learn it is because it's going to come up again, and it's going to come up again in Dr. Ami's class. So you need to understand how the research proposal works, and you need to understand all this nomenclature, all these ideas, because she'll be throwing them at you and not telling you what the definitions are. So what the exams are, they're all from the PowerPoints. So as long as you look at the PowerPoints, you can find the answers in your book as well. But if you follow the PowerPoints, the answers should be in the PowerPoints, or you can find them in your book. But you can take the test any way you want. It's not a proctored test. It's not a time test. You don't have to take it this week. You can take it next week if you want. You can take it, you know, you can take all 5 tests the on the last day of class if you want. I'm not thinking you'll do very well, um, but what's the idea? Anyway, I'm trying to prepare you for Dr. Ami's class because that's going to be a real kick-ass class. She wants you to know this stuff, and I don't blame her. You know, if you're going to do research, you need to be able to understand what's going on. So that's what the exams are all about. You know, I may, potentially you read it. I tell you about it in the PowerPoints, and then when you take the exam, you learn what I think was the most important. The 40 most important points from any 3 chapters. That's what the exam's all about. So you see it 3 times, and the truth of education is some people can learn just by seeing things one time, but most people, especially if it's something they're not interested in, it's going to take 3 times, seeing something 3 times, or thinking about something 3 times before it goes into your long-term memory. That's the way it works. So potentially what I'm doing with the exam is showing you this stuff for the 3rd time, okay? Look at all these pretty pictures. There you go. You want to see the exams are right here. Oh, you got all the exams on your website anyway, on Blackboard. Anyway, okay, so I'll see you guys next week. I don't know if I'll do this before. I have to help my son move, and the truck's coming in on Saturday. We're going to load it on Saturday. I think we're going to leave Sunday morning, maybe. We're going to be in North Carolina. He's moving to Raleigh, so that's kind of cool. Not a real fan of Florida. It's humid here, and the people are kind of grouchy. They're certainly not as nice as the people on the reservation. That's for sure. So I miss you guys. I really do miss you guys. I'm not coming back to Saline in the fall. I'll be teaching from Iowa. And potentially I'll just teach from Iowa from now on, mainly because of COVID-19. But we were thinking of making the psychology program an online program anyway. There are certain parameters that we need to match, to certain points that we have to do before we can be completely online. But it looks like maybe in the future, and that's what we're aiming for anyway. Dr. Lerma and Professor Barber and Dr. Begay and Dr. Russ. That's what we're aiming for. We're trying to move this online because, well, the reality is that, I mean, how many people live in Saley? How many people live in Chinle? You know, I know we've got we got a education center in Tuba City and Crown Point and Window Rock and Shiprock, but the reality is a lot of you guys live in Ganado. You know, you're too far away to be driving all that way, especially in the wintertime. I hate going over the mountain in the wintertime, and now I don't have to do that anymore. I'm in Iowa with my wife, and that's kind of fun anyway. So my wife's a lot of fun. She's just a ton of fun. Anyway, so okay, I'll see you guys next week. And I don't know when I'll do the next lecture. Maybe next week, maybe tomorrow. You never know. Okay, so I love you guys, and do well in class. I'm not here to flunk anybody. Just think about all this stuff. You know, it will make me feel good, and potentially if you do a really good job on your proposal, that's what you can carry over. You can think about this, and when you take Dr. Ami's 413 class, Psych 413 class, you'll already have your proposal. And of course, it's not going to be good enough for her, and she'll want you to revise it in one way or another. Anyway, but that's okay. You know, she's trying to make it a stronger research. Anyway, there you go. Sorry about the Garth article. I just wanted you to see that sometimes research says some really nasty things about people, and they couch it as absolutes. And the reality is there are no absolutes in social sciences. None. Not a one. Okay, so I'll see you guys next week. Love you.